131, where I'm going to be pooping on David Leavitt and Utah in general. We're going to be going over some current events in tonight's episode. But first, I want to address some of the recent feedback I've gotten on social media. And this woman isn't first, and she certainly won't be the last. But I'm going to address it because it's been a long time coming. IRA is going to be behind a paywall. There's no easy way to say this, but it costs money to do what we do at IRA. And quite frankly, I've reached a point where it's like, okay, I've subsidized this to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars of my own money. I have diverted revenue away from private projects that I've done for private clients, back into the Hamlin case and the efforts that I made. So it's not like I'm asking people to subsidize me. Personally, I've kept the subscription rate between $5 and $6 a month. So nobody does this work to get rich. I don't do it to get rich. Justin Riggs doesn't do it to get rich. Number of other people that I'm aware of don't do it to get rich. But the graphic that you're seeing up here is kind of emblematic of, what a lot of us who are creators in this space go through. Where's the info about Tim Ballard and Phil Lyman? In the last half of the article below the paywall for subscribers. Gotcha. Can you share a screenshot of that part for the non-paying subscribers? No. No, I can't. I mean, typically I have in the past. But one of the things that I am rapidly getting tired of is the fact that I have over 2,000 subscribers on Substack, 160 of whom are paying subscribers, and another 25 or so who did what I asked, and they subscribed to the channel, and I gave them a comped year subscription to Investigations in Ritual Abuse on Substack. I generally have made most of my posts free for, 3 days or longer. I originally put IRA behind a paywall because I was dealing with a lot of spurious copyright complaints that were being filed by the usual suspects. And then there are two things that have really stuck in my craw lately. One is a remark that was relayed to me about competition yesterday afternoon by someone that I've warned in the past. If you talk about me to other people, I'm going to fire back publicly, and I did. I fired back at Jason Preston. He said a number of things to say about me and my wife, and the fact that we don't march in lockstep with his vision of the movement, whatever the hell that is. And he's free to do whatever he wants to do on his podcast. He's free to do whatever the hell he wants on any platform that he owns. He's free to do that, and I am free to do what I do, which is actual journalism. That involves spending a lot of time, effort, and energy and money substantiating everything that I publish. That means that I pay for court documents out of subscription revenue at IRA. It means that I pay for annual and monthly subscriptions to the services that I use in the course of generating content for IRA, property records, court records, corporate records, travel like gas money, lodging, when you stay in an Airbnb, as opposed to, a hotel to save money. Big fan of Airbnb, by the way. So if you travel, stay in an Airbnb. It's fantastic compared to hotels. But ultimately, it costs money to do what I do. Cost a lot of money. It's cost me a great deal of money over the past 4 years, and I'm not complaining. I've been blessed by God to be able to afford to do it. But I will say this, when someone just point blank says, gotcha, can you share a screenshot of that part for the non-paying subscribers? It's probably about the 1,000th time that has happened. And again, you don't do this to get rich. You don't do it really to even do anything other than break even. And that's what I've done for 4 years with the work I've done over at IRA, is break even. That's the deal that I made with myself, is that on balance, I would break even between subscription revenue, money that I donated to the cause because I believed in this, and everything else. I made a deal with myself that I would not spend more money than I was able to put in. That is, between the subscription revenue, between the revenue that I diverted from private projects for paying clients into this, I would always break even. I would not go in the hole. And I've been able to do that thanks to paying subscribers and donors. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate everybody who ever donated anything. But I've been going through the last few articles and can't find a Ballard Lyman segment. What was the title, please, or date? It is the most recent article on investigations and ritual abuse. This is the private investigator hired by David Leavitt to look into federal agents. Now, before it gets into the specifics of that private investigator's identity and his background, there's a paywall for anyone who's a non-paying subscriber, and the reason for that is obvious. I want you to subscribe. $6 a month. It's not that much money. It's less than Netflix and Amazon Prime and New Skin and what's the Senate Oil one? All the MLMs in Utah that people spend $1,000 to start. I want you to subscribe. It's that simple. That helps me offset my costs in doing this. That simple. If I were a shitty human being, maybe I'd start a religion and say, if you don't give me 10%, I won't let you do the earthly ordinances that will secure your godhead in the next life. Seems like a reasonable thing to do in Utah. It's apparently the order of the day, but unfortunately I'm handicapped by a conscience, and I refuse to degrade myself. Like, I do have something of a sense of shame, no matter what my ex-wives want to say. So, if you would, subscribing to IRA helps us at $6 a month to offset our cost in doing this work. End rant. And Jennifer Starbus, you're by no means the only person who has ever had the entitled pompous ass attitude of asking for things for free, and you won't be the last. But it has gotten old, that and having people who are purportedly your allies in this take shots at you on shows like Ward Radio, which is exactly what happened. Unprompted, unsolicited. The guy that I'm supposedly in competition with, Jason Preston, who does an entirely different thing, basically gives anybody who wants to go on a show a forum to say whatever unsubstantiated things that they want to say without receipts or documentation. That's what he does. He gives them a forum. A lot of people are fans of that, and they're entitled to their opinion. I don't do that. Not only do I show receipts on investigations of ritual abuse on Substack, I make all of my primary source documents available for free to the public on investigationsandritualabuse.com. And you can go and you can look at all the police reports and victim statements, all the stuff that was dug up on Gordon Bowen, all the things that have been dug up on the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization lawsuit that has been filed by Kate Baxter and her younger sister Miriam Hamblin against 8 named defendants in does 1 through 100. I showed you the receipts and the primary source documents for my reporting for obvious reasons. One is I want you to know why I arrive at the conclusions that I arrive at. 2 is, like, this is the worst stuff that you can accuse anybody of. Sexual assault is the worst crime you can accuse somebody of. I personally would rather be known as a murderer than be known as someone who's a rapist. Those are my personal feelings on it. So you don't want to falsely accuse somebody, and you don't want to baselessly accuse somebody. 4 years into this, I am 100% convinced that the people who are named in the Hamlin victim statements did what they were accused of doing. Without exception. I don't believe that there are any innocent people in those victim statements or the police reports or the DCFS reports or the worse filings or anything for Hamblin, for Bowen, for Leavitt, for any of the other people who are involved in this. I don't believe that they're innocent. I believe that they're guilty as sin, and I believe that they benefited from a corrupt system in Utah that enabled them to operate in plain sight for years, as long as they towed the line on church doctrine. And because these people are so retarded, they couldn't even do that. All you had to do was exercise your camouflage, stay covert, and be a good little Molly Mormon or Mike Mormon, and nobody would have paid any attention to you. Unfortunately, you had to do things like go to smoke peace pipes of peyote at Indian religious ceremonies, or swallow capsules of peyote and throw up while you talked about your feelings. I mean, that's what these people were doing back in the 90s and 2000s and even today. They clearly embrace positions that are contrary to church doctrine. I mean, you can look at their storefronts, their homes, the neighborhoods that they live in, and you can see that while they are members of the club, that is, they're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they clearly do not agree with the core teachings, doctrines, and practices of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. As is their right, but I don't understand why you would belong to a church if you just don't agree with its doctrines and its beliefs and its principles. Why would you do that? Why would you just go form your own club centered around whatever the hell it is that these people believe, and do your own thing? And I'll tell you why, because a lot of these people are miserable dorks who don't have the initiative or the drive to build anything of their own. because they worship a God who can only destroy, he can't create. That God is Lucifer. Tonight's episode, as always, is brought to you by Coors Edge, non-alcoholic beer. Coming in second place to PBR non-alcoholic, but I like bottles as opposed to cans because bottles here lately tend to be a little more optimum for my hands and my fine motor skills. I'm going through some health issues. So Coors Edge it is, non-alcoholic beer. So ultimately, these are people who are members of very prominent LDS families that trace back to the pioneers. But they're the members of those families who were on the fringe and who didn't quite make it. They're kind of the weirdos and outcast of their prominent families. They don't have what it takes to succeed in the mainstream. They don't have what it takes to succeed. They're always going to be on the fringe. So when you drive by their houses or their storefronts, you're going to see things like rainbow flags and Black Lives Matter and whatever other pandering, virtue signaling nonsense these people want to advertise their liberalism with. And again, I mean, it's fine if you want to be a liberal, if you want to be a leftist, if you want to be anything that you want to be. I just don't understand why you would want to be a Latter-day Saint or any form of an Orthodox or conservative Christian. Why would you want to do that? And these people have infiltrated the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They've infiltrated virtually every other Christian denomination under the sun, and they bring with them their nonsense, which is, we have to let men who think that they are women use the women's restroom while biological women and girls wait outside the doorway because we recognize the impropriety that is inherent in that arrangement. We don't want our biological wives and daughters going into the bathroom while a grown-ass man is defecating in the ladies' restroom. So we'll make them wait outside. But in the name of political correctness and inclusivity, we will allow a delusional, mentally ill man in a dress to go defecate in the women's restroom. And ultimately, that's what transgenderism is. It's about enabling men who have fetishized being in women's spaces access to those women's spaces, which were hard fought for and hard won. So now you have boys, biological boys who can't cut it in boy sports, moving over into girl sports. It's pretty transparent because you never see like a female transitioning to male who wants to be part of boys sports at the high school or college level. You don't see that for obvious reasons. What you do see are a bunch of mediocre boys, mediocre biological males saying, I'm a girl now because I couldn't hack it as a boy. And then they get into girls or women's sports. You see this Leah Thomas and others whose names slip my mind at the moment. But Leah Thomas, most famous one, she was an NCAA swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania, I believe it was. And she's a he. It's a boy. No amount of political correctness or inclusive language will change the fact that Leah Thomas is a man. And churches are supposed to be the last bastion of truth and rationality in that respect. Like, men are supposed to be men in churches, women are supposed to be women, boys are supposed to be boys, girls are supposed to be girls, and the insanity of the world gets checked at the door. The war on media conducted by the devil and his demons gets checked at the door. But unfortunately, in the case of modern day churches, that is no longer the case. Churches are in a rush to accommodate the world and to be like ultimately what we're experiencing is what Christ experienced. He was taken to the summit of the temple and shown the world in the blink of an eye, all the kingdoms of the world. And he was given the option. He could bow down to Satan and worship him, because the kingdoms of this world, the domain of this world, has been given to Satan, and he could give it to who he will. And ultimately, my theory as I get older and approach half a century of existence is that people who rise to any prominence in politics, any position of power in politics or business, do so because they have made a literal deal with the devil. And it shows because they start talking about transgenderism and homosexuality and abortion and identity politics in terms that resemble liberal or left-wing talking points. And make no mistake about it, I do not wake up every day and think I'm automatically better than anybody because of the color of my skin. I wake up every day and I know that I'm better than everybody because of the color of my skin. I'm kidding. That's a joke. I'm sure that'll be clipped and cut into something damaging later. But ultimately what I believe is that we are all created in the image of God, and I wish that we would all act like it. Some of the things that I see on social media with respect to people's personal behavior and their quote-unquote identity, bad behavior has become their identity. Self-destructive behavior has become their identity. And ultimately, the call of Christ, in my experience, has become better than you actually are. To improve as a person, to rely on His grace and His strength and His mercy, to become what He would have you become as opposed to what you naturally are. Which is why I don't sleep with a lot of chicks and do a lot of drugs and drink alcoholic beer anymore. It's because I have been claimed by Christ, and those things are just inconsistent with living my optimum life in Christ. I am a culturalist, and I believe Christianity is the balm in Gilead, the respite and nepenthe, as Poe put it. I believe it is the antidote for what ails us. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be a professing Christian. I certainly wouldn't be trying to govern myself accordingly as my nemesis someone is trying to start shit in the comments. Nunk Demitis, who's here to hear shit about the Preston's hit like now? Get over 10 likes and set him free. You know, if it were just Jason Preston, I would shit on him all day. I have gotten to a point where I just do not like him. His wife is lovely. And unfortunately, there always appears to be collateral damage. And what did my old man say about it when he was alive? If you get into a poop throwing contest with the other monkeys, guess what? You all just end up with poop all over you and all over your hands. So I'm trying to be magnanimous here. I don't like the fact that I keep hearing remarks about Jason Preston and his purported commentary about me. I try to handle it privately initially, and I told him, if you keep talking about me or my wife, I'm going to fire back publicly. I think that's a reasonable position. And again, I have never heard his wife. I've never heard of his wife saying anything negative about myself, IRA, or my wife Cindy. Alexia has always been lovely and appropriate. I cannot say enough good things about her. And I want to stress that. Don't be ugly to Alexia Preston. In fact, don't even be ugly to Jason Preston. This is between myself and Jason Preston. And it's going to remain that way. I don't ask other people to fight my fights for me. I'm perfectly capable of handling Jason Preston myself. At the end of the day, I think it is important to delineate between what I do at IRA and what he does at We Are the People Utah. Because I'm not in competition with him. And here's what I mean by that. I don't do sensationalism. I do not repeat bare allegations of sexual abuse or sexual impropriety. In the Hamlin case alone, I've talked to 335 people who report to be victimized by at least one individual in the Hamlin victim statements. Of that 335 people, only 103 passed muster with me. That is, only 103 had verifiable stories that were corroborated by evidence and record. And one of the things that I've been most disgusted with over the past 4 years is that every single one of those individuals was told at the beginning that my purpose in helping them and offering them pre-work, pre-labor to substantiate their allegations was to help them talk to an attorney to obtain a civil judgment or to talk to law enforcement to obtain a criminal conviction against the people who abuse them. I'm not asking for 1%. If just one of those 103 people came forward, that would be under 1%. And I understand their reticence. Utah has an under 13% prosecution rate per rape reports. For the third of rape reports that actually make it to the police and actually are reported, they only prosecute 13% of them, and they convict less than 3% of the people who allegedly raped people. So Utah is disgusting in that respect. I'm aware of cases that have stretched on a decade or longer for sexual abuse. So even if they do bring charges against someone and they do prosecute them, it becomes a battle of attrition. And what I mean by that is victims have to wait for years. Tobias Schroeder's been waiting for 4 years down in the 6th District in Manti to be able to testify as to what David Lee Hamlin did to him at trial and to see David Lee Hamlin face criminal culpability. And that's unacceptable because in the state of Utah, you do have something called the Victims' Bill of Rights that guarantees victims, not just defendants, but victims, a right to a speedy trial. And that clearly has not been the case in the 4 years that I worked ritual abuse cases in the state of Utah and the surrounding area. It's both ritual and non-ritual sexual abuse. The charges that have been brought have been discounted. The people who have been subjected to this have been subjected to absolutely atrocious behavior. They're not safe, and they don't feel safe. So I know that the other individual, Emily Sheets, who courageously brought charges against David Lee Hamlin, reported him for abusing her, reported Roselle Stevenson, his ex-wife, for abusing her. She said that her home was broken into, her car was vandalized, she was threatened, and David Lee Hamlin had a nasty habit of showing up whenever she was going to the grocery store. She had to move. She lives under constant fear. And her experience is not atypical. I have personally been on the phone or in person with victim after victim who is terrified because these people show up to their houses and to their places of work to make veiled allusions to the abuse that they inflicted on them as children, to taunt them. It's not enough to rape a child. It's not enough to physically abuse a child. It's not enough to force a child to kill an animal or another human being. These people are in their 30s and 40s now, and the people who abuse them are in their 60s and 70s, and they are still showing up to their places of business, their workplaces, in the parking lots, and confronting them and taunting them with veiled references to what has to be the worst experience of their lives. It is open season on victims in Utah, and as I've said before, Utah is a sanctuary state for sexual predators, and that's not an accident. But the difference between what I do in my reporting and what Jason Preston is I don't put out content at the same clip that he does because I have to have evidence. I have to have facts. I have to have records to substantiate what the hell it is that I'm saying. That's just me personally. That's been my defining trait my entire life. It's why over 25 years of doing this type of work, I've never been sued for defamation. I've never been sued for anything. And that's because I do solid work. I present receipts for everything that I say and everything that I publish. And as much as I might want to believe victims, some people who purport to be victims aren't. There are people who file false reports. There are people who tell the truth in part about their abuse and then lie about other aspects of their abuse for whatever reason. But as I tell every victim that I ever sit down for an initial interview with, tell me the truth, even the parts of it that make you look bad. I can work with the truth. But if you lie to me, I will find out. And if I can find out, any decent defense attorney will find out. And I can't help you. And what I have watched with growing alarm on Jason Preston's show is a tendency to latch on to the most sensational claims, but to present absolutely zero corroborating evidence for those claims. There's no primary source documents. There's no evidence whatsoever, no medical exams, no anything. Nothing. It's just that person's bare allegation. Again, it's his platform, and it's his show, and he can do what he wants. I can voice my opinion about it since he has clearly voiced his opinion about me to multiple people over the past year or so. I am free to voice my opinion about him and the work that he's doing. He has been sued not for anything that I've done. I am not a party to his current defamation case. I am going to be deposed this coming week, health permitting, by the attorney in that case for his plaintiffs, Joe and Lee Binion. And Ultimately, I think what the minions hoped to do and what their attorney hoped to do was find out who had spoken to me about the abuse that they had inflicted, allegedly. Because ultimately, the great thing about criminals is they know who they victimized, they know who they abused, they know what they did. But what they really would like to know is who spoke up about it. And that's what this spurious stalking case. I've never met these people. I've never called them, texted them, emailed them, really had anything to do with them other than responding to a restack of my Substack content, which apparently is a violation of a stalking injunction in this totalitarian state. Which, in the time that I've lived here, it's been like living in the Twilight Zone. I don't think I've ever lived in another state where your property taxes go up by 25% or more year over year, and where your government just basically tells you to fuck off if you have a problem with anything that they do. In my day job, I have watched in real time the policies of the state play out, and that what I mean by that is the number of uninsured drivers who hit and severely injure other people, and they either have a suspended license or they have one of those little fake driver's licenses because they're here illegally, and because, again, we want to be inclusive, and no human is illegal. Isn't that what they say these days? No human is illegal. No one's saying that their existence is illegal. What we're saying is that the second they step across the border illegally, they're committing a crime. That's just a fact, and facts are inconvenient realities for liberals to overcome. And for those of us who belong to Christian churches, we believe in following the law. We pay our taxes. We basically participate in the civic contract. We expect to receive the benefits of it. We expect to receive a functioning law enforcement apparatus that punishes people who rape at more than a 3% conviction rate. We expect our tax dollars to produce, good public education where our kids know how to read and write, as opposed to just parenting slogans about Black Lives Mattering and, love is love and all of this other nonsense, pablum. But that's not what we're getting. We are not getting a return on our investment. What? Oh, Nunk, you really want me to start hurling shits? I'm pretty sure some people took back their likes. Well, I'm stuck at 8, and I think that's roughly what was there. If they did take back their likes, oh well, they're entitled to do that. Ultimately, the thing that has struck me about the Hamlin case is that every single one of these people was, at least by the standards of Texas or Florida, where I was in the church, an apostate. They don't believe in what the church believes. They don't believe in what it teaches or what it promotes in terms of membership and behavior. But they still go to church, and they still rant and rave and fast in testimony meetings, and they make everybody uncomfortable. Gordon Bowen at the Garden Park Ward used to stand up and fast in testimony meetings and praise Barbara Bowen's skills as a lover, in super dramatic fashion. I spoke to multiple people from that ward at the time that they were married who said it was god awful to deal with. And then there are people in fast and testimony meetings down in Spring City who talk about how Joe Binion stands up in the middle of these fast and testimony meetings and cries about how the white man stole Indian land. None of which has anything to do with being a Christian or a Mormon or anything else. It's just this narcissistic performance. Like, look at me, look at how woke I am. And it should have been dealt with, and it would have been dealt with in any other state where I went to church as a Latter-day Saint. Wouldn't have been permitted. The lines were always very clear. And if you were going to be a member of the club, you had to play by the club's rules. And that is clearly not the case in Utah. And some people are waking up to that fact. Some people are waking up to the fact that the church has been infiltrated by people who don't believe what the church teaches, don't care to behave in the way the church promotes in terms of their personal conduct. They don't want to follow the law of chastity or the word of wisdom. They don't want to follow the law of consecration. They don't want to follow the rules of the club that they're in. But they still want to remain members of the club, and they want to pull the club towards whatever end that they favor. And that sort of moral relativism carries over into what you see with ritual abuse disclosures. One of the things that I had words with Preston about was giving LGBTQIA individuals a platform or a forum to spew their allegations, uncorroborated, unsubstantiated, unsupported by any evidence whatsoever, just bare allegations, and to make oxymoronic statements like, I am a queer Christian, which I believe her name was River. Queer Christian is an oxymoron like Zionist Christian. I mean, you can be one or the other. You can't be both. But that's where we're at in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and in Christianity as all. There are those of us who believe that the atonement is the source of our salvation, the forgiveness for our sins, our deliverance from eternal death and alienation from God. We believe that the atonement of Jesus Christ is the source of our salvation. And then there are those of us who believe that we can go get our feet washed on Sunday at the temple and be anointed or crowned kings and priests of heaven, high kings or high priestess of heaven. I forget what the exact verbiage is. It's so absurd. We could have our second anointing, our calling and election made sure. And from that point forward, as long as we don't shed innocent blood or blaspheme against the Holy Spirit, we're good to go no matter what we do. That is blasphemy at its worst. Grace is transformative. I know it has been for me. Like, my life changed when I came to Christ. The things that I was able to do with impunity before I came to Christ, drunkenness, whoring, drugging, all of that, fell by the wayside. My life was changed. My appetites were changed. And I started to experience the consequences of my actions in terms of alienation from God if I did lapse or sin or fall short. Because sin causes God to withdraw from our lives. That's the punishment. That's the consequences, that our communion with God is disrupted. And here you have on We Are the People Utah this inclusive attitude that a queer Christian like River, who by her own admission was still involved in this group within the past year, still involved in ordinances and ceremonies and abuse, within the past year. She's a queer Christian. She's a ritual abuse survivor. There was a crucifixion at the state capitol, none of which was backed by any receipts or any proof or any evidence whatsoever. Nothing about that story was backed by that. As I went on, I would watch these stories roll out time and time again. And again, it's his platform, it's his show. He can do what he wants. Um, but what I watched was him reaching for the brass ring and just having anybody on who would make any claim whatsoever, as long as it was sensational. And for me, like one of the big moments, and I covered this in my article Whelp on IRA, he went on Ward Radio. Initially it was supposed to be him and Justin Riggs, but they canceled on Justin Riggs for obvious reasons, because Justin Riggs would have torn them to pieces. They had Jason Preston on, and Jason is unable to turn down the spotlight. He's like a moth or a bug on a porch with a light at night. He's going to go towards the light every single time. So he took the opportunity to appear on Ward Radio, and unsolicited, unprompted, he brought me up and basically sandbagged me, and then said that he had shut me down over allegations against the top 15 officers of the church, which by now Jason has implicated the top 15 officers of the church himself, something that he condemned me for on Ward Radio, and said, oh, I wouldn't allow that on my show. Well, in his recent content, Apostle Bednar has been named. Member of the First Presidency, Todd Christofferson, has been named as an abuser. There have been many others named as an abuser. And what is incredible about it is, I believe her name was Jenica Smith. She named Alan Oaks, the current president of the church, current prophet, seer, and revelator of the church, as her ritual abuser. And then later on in the same interview said that she sustained him as the prophet, seer, and revelator of the church. I could not wrap my head around that. I couldn't understand why that went unchallenged or unpushed back on in that episode. Someone who rapes a child in a temple is not called of God for anything. And if what this lady is saying about Alan Oaks is true, I believe that it is, because of other allegations that I've heard against Alan Oaks, which I won't go into because I don't have nearly as much to substantiate them, other than the sheer amount of allegations against Alan Oaks and others predating M. Russell Ballard's death. 14 of the top 15 officers of the church had dozens of allegations against them, which I am aware of. But I stuck with the Hamlin case because, again, I disciplined my focus to what I believe is achievable. And the Hamlin case already had over 140 perpetrators at that point. So I stuck with that. We've got difficult research. Hi, Goel. Researching Tricia Griffith from Wanship, Utah. I can't say that I'm familiar with that name. She found a warranty deed from John and Janet DeYoung to Kendall and Cheryl Kincaid. The DeYoung name is what caught my attention, as it should. DeYoung. There are so many variations of these last names, particularly the Dutch ones. It was called Mountainside Condo Phases 1 and 2, Unit 7856 720 215. I guess that's the date that it was deeded over. I'm just looking to see if anything perks your ears. Cottonwood, Park City. Full disclosure, I have more or less stuck with Provo and Spring City in certain neighborhoods in Salt Lake as part of my research into the Hamlin case. Wanship, Utah does not ring a bell to me, and neither does Kendall or Cheryl Kincaid. I'm sure you have a reason for asking or for focusing on those people. I'll talk to you at some point in the future. We've spoken in the past, so you free to ask me questions or see what I think about what you found. Again, it will remain yours. I am glad that you are looking at property transactions because that is critical to this. I mean, one of the core allegations that the Hamlin sisters made was that members of the CS move into neighborhoods where the CS has an existing presence so they can be safer to practice their religion. Tricia is the owner of Web Sleuths, True Crime Web Forum. Her dad was CIA. Her mom was a codebreaker for British intelligence. They're Arringtons. I assume she's referring to Leonard and his son, James Arrington. James Arrington obviously is a Brigham Young impersonator. He performs as Brother Brigham. And he is named as an abuser and a member of the CS in the Hamlin victim statements. And we're on to Coors Edge, number 2 on the night. Coors Edge. Not PBR, but close enough. As I said earlier in the podcast, I've enjoyed bottles more lately than cans because owing to some issues with my fine motor skills, bottles are a little easier to manage. Good news. I apparently do not need surgery on my neck yet. So we're hoping that the physical therapy, which is just a barrel of fun, works, as well as something called a radio frequency ablation, which hopefully will resolve issues with numbness, paralysis, and other unpleasantries. In the meantime, my physical therapist at Frontier Physical Therapy have been lovely. Can't recommend them enough. My nephrologist, my general practitioner, so on and so forth, they've done wonders. So, praise to them and praise to God for providing them. Glowjazz, I have had 2 radio frequency ablations. Please do tell me what I can expect, because my life right now is a horror show of health issues. If you follow the show, I mean, I've been broadcasting from my bedroom as opposed to downstairs in the studio in my basement. I have a recliner that is much more comfortable to sit in and has an adjustable headrest that helps a great deal with the cervical and thoracic issues that I've had. Basically, C2 through C6 in my cervical spine are jacked. Although 2 of them appear to be getting somewhat better with therapy and medication. And the other 2, nerve roots, disc impingements, that sort of thing. It's okay. Half a century old, and I've lived a rich and eventful life, some of which involves chronic injuries related to my eventful life. At the end of the day, thank you, Glow Jazz, for saying, they have helped. I'm getting rather tired of paying for healthcare procedures that don't work and for treatment options that don't really appear to work. I'm up to 23 pills. It's great being old and busted. 23 pills, 2 injectables, but at least the injectables are only weekly as opposed to daily. And I am down to going to the doctor, the therapist, physical therapist, like twice a week. I think this week I will only have had 3 doctor's visits, which is down from considerably more. So, thank God for that. Doctor's offices, the most miserable and expensive place to be. So, enough about that. I digress, as I am wont to do. But, ultimately, back to the topic at hand. I do not agree with giving gay people or LGBTQI or what I call the LMNOP community a platform to spew their nonsense. I have a sister who's a lesbian, and anytime she tries to point to a biblical basis for her lesbianism, that gets shut down by my brother and I pretty quickly. Just, it isn't compatible with the Bible. So, adultery, pornography, all these purportedly Christian men who say they're pornography addicts, I'm not aware of any man addicted to pornography who needed a shot of Narcan up his nose to overcome his porn overdose. So I'm not buying what they're selling. At the end of the day, I make a choice every day not to look at that shit. And I think it's incumbent upon every other Christian man to make a choice not to look at that shit. You know your priorities by how you invest your time. And I invest my time in my wife and, of course, my executive producer, Layla Lou, the Chihuahua, who is comfortably nestled down in the chair with me. At the end of the day, I go to work and I go home. If I go anywhere outside of those 2 places, my wife goes with me. And there is no mystery about anything. And I think that's the way it should be. I think a lot of Christian men who have this delusion of, privacy or me time or whatever. Christian men and women need to get over that. Your time is not your own. It belongs to God and your children, which is why I work so much, because I have a very expensive daughter and I have to pay for her future and her present. I have my nephews and nieces and my wife. My wife doesn't cost that much, just household expenses. And at the end of the day, the Christian walk is pretty simple and straightforward, which is why I don't understand why we're even having to have some of these discussions that we're having in Christendom lately. Polyamory, having sex with someone other than your spouse, that's unacceptable. That's fornication, that's adultery, and the Bible's very clear. Every other sin takes place outside of the body except sexual immorality. Sexual immorality takes place inside of the body, and your body is meant to be a temple of the living God, His Spirit. And, of course, when you desecrate that temple, through overeating, through any sort of substance dependency or abuse, through adultery, so on and so forth, you are desecrating His living space. That's a serious matter. So the idea that the church that I used to be a part of, the church that I thought had the highest standard for its members, the church that I loved, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, was lowering their standards to accommodate Cosmo the Cougar, uh, the former mascot, Charlie Bird, and his husband, giving them callings in their ward and stake, even though they are in open apostasy and sin. I mean, the family proclamation is what it is. Marriage is between a biological male and a biological female. I was under the impression that was the doctrine of the church, and that was the position of the church. And, you know, in Texas and Florida, if you cheated on your wife, you would be excommunicated. And it was not, it was just basic common sense. Like, these are things that you don't do. You got to go. You're not really a Christian. You don't really believe what we believe. You don't want to follow the rules of the club that you're in. And of course, you represent us to the world. And if we tolerate you and your nonsense, well, you'll have to go. Because you'll not only be denigrating us, you'll be denigrating God. And the problem people have isn't so much with God, it's with his so-called followers in this world. And the fact that they don't live what they profess. I'm down to one bad habit, and that's profanity, and I have severely curbed my profanity in this podcast. I have not said as many expletives as I wanted to. I've stopped myself multiple times. My wife has been working on me. One thing I've realized in our marriage is I need to be worked on. My wife is fully formed, and she does nothing wrong, and she is an angel before God, man. And I am the rough one. And, I'm not supposed to be using corrupt communication, so my profanity being what it is, I have tried to work on it and curb it. I used to curse so much you'd think I had Tourette's. But God is gracious, and he has given me the wherewithal to overcome my impulse to curse profusely about everything. It's also a big part of why. It's also a big part of why my wife drives us places. Because my rage towards other drivers is oft lamented and well documented. And in the state of Utah, a lot of people cannot drive. But, be that as it may, we're talking about gays and abortionists and liberals in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and how they don't belong in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or any other Christian church because they're not Christian. They don't believe in the rules of Christianity in terms of sexual purity, in terms of personal conduct and obedience to God. They worship themselves. As is their right. I mean, that's their choice. They want to worship themselves, they can. And as someone who's been friends with a number of gay men, they clearly adore themselves. R.I.P. Big Gay Drew. I hope you made it to the less hot place. And I'm sorry for telling you that it was okay to be gay back when I was more liberal and permissive about this, because it isn't. But be that as it may, God is gracious and forgiving, and if he's reached me and my considerable depravities over the course of my life, he can reach you and he can change you, and he will forgive you because he has forgiven me so many trespasses and indiscretions over the course of my life. So I'm not here to sit here and say I'm just saying it was very clear that early in my life, before my daughter was born, before I came to Christ, it was very clear that I wasn't Christian, and I wasn't trying to argue that I was. I wasn't trying to make churches accommodate my hedonism. And what I resent about modern Satanists and all of their variations is that they are trying to infiltrate churches and make those churches change their doctrine and their rules to accommodate depravity so that sin is no longer called sin. And that's what's going on in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. If you really want to get down to brass tacks, before you get to the level of ritual abuse, indifference in things minor carries over into things major. And of course, when you have someone who professes to be a faithful Latter-day Saint having someone on their show who calls themselves a queer Christian, that's part of the problem. You're platforming that nonsense, and you're not arguing against it or disputing it or standing against it. You are accommodating and including it. And I know from personal conversations I've had with Jason Preston about this, he's fine with that. He believes that polygamy is a matter between consenting adults. And I've explained to him that it isn't. Very often, you're talking about children who are coerced in a plural marriage by much older men. It's child rape, but it's sanctioned as, marriage between consenting adults because you could go over the border to Idaho and get married to a 14-year-old. And under the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution, that is legitimated. It's acknowledged by Utah as legitimate marriage. And of course, if you get down to the colonias in Mexico, you can be sealed to them at 13. And you could consummate the marriage in those colonias. It's child rape. And I don't have any patience for anyone who wants to say that it's anything else. Or not all polygamists, just like they want to sit there and say not all Jews and not all Muslims. Enough. Enough of them do rape kids. Enough of them do hold ethnic supremacist views and also just abominable views. They go against the Christian standard, which is Imago Dei. Everyone's created in the image of God, and I just wish that they would live like it. The world would be a better place if they did, if they were mindful of the fact that, you're created by God for His purpose and for His pleasure, and you're created in His image, and you should, as my nemesis Caleb Prull says, govern yourself accordingly. It's hard. I'm not saying that it's easy to go against your nature and to not do the things that you are naturally inclined to do. Like sanctification is a gradual process. You're forgiven for all of your sins, past, present, and future. That's justification the minute you receive Christ. But sanctification, perfection in God, is a gradual process in this life. And we're all obligated, if we're professing Christians, to follow that path, that course that God has set us upon. And if you're going to be a member of a purportedly Christian church, you have to be Christian. That means that you have to follow the rules of Christianity. You have to be monogamous in your marriage to a biological member of the opposite sex. You can't engage in same-sex relationships. You can't construct an identity to absolve yourself of sin. I'm pansexual, whatever that is. I mean, these people just make up acronyms at this point, which is why they have a plus sign on the end of whatever their latest acronym is. I just call them the LMNOP community. And of course, you can't commit infanticide. That's another thing. You can't normalize infanticide, which is what abortion is. And all of these people in the Hamlin victim statement, they are pro-abortion. They are pro-infanticide. They are pro-sodomy. They are pro-degeneracy. You know them by their fruits. Like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Christianity in general are incompatible with things like Native American religion, which is pagan. They don't worship Christ, not as the sole path to the Father. They don't worship Christ as the sole source of salvation. In fact, many of them don't believe that you need to be redeemed. And consequently, the church's reality reflects this nonsense. It's not an accident that Charlie Bird is married to a man and has a church calling and is not facing a church court or council, like a membership council, for his apostasy and for his open, unrepentant sin. That is not an accident. That is an outgrowth of the reality of the church, which is degraded at this point. And it's a short leap from all of that to what we're talking about on IRA in terms of sexual abuse and sexual impropriety, both ritual and non-ritual context for that. It's a short leap from that. And the thing is, IRA will never normalize sin and call it anything other than what it is. We won't do that. We will not give LMNOP community members, pro-infanticide people, a platform to normalize sin or to reclassify sin as something other than sin. That's something that Jason Preston clearly feels comfortable with on We Are the People Utah, and I got off the bandwagon with him a long time ago over that. I expressed privately to him my reservations about River after that show aired. At the end of the day, the standard matters. Like, you're either in or you're out. You either believe in what the Bible says about sexual immorality, infanticide, and the fact that in Leviticus these behaviors are listed as part of idolatry. If you read the New Testament, it's every single time they have a list of these kinds of behaviors, they're talking about idolatry, and it is no accident that these satanic ritual abuse groups practice this type of deviancy or degeneracy. It's part of their worship. It's a sacrament to them. That's why they make children eat feces and drink urine, and that's why they rape kids. That's why they prostitute them. That's why they produce child pornography. It's because that's how they worship their false god, Lucifer. You can't separate one from the other. And anyone who is actively involved in that kind of behavior, they don't worship Christ. They don't worship God. And they're not struggling with same-sex attraction or pornography addiction. They're in the other kingdom. And they are part of the enemy's army. It's just that simple. And unfortunately, I don't bear witness with Jason Preston as a Christian at this point. I didn't bear witness with him as a Latter-day Saint because he so clearly did not embrace that standard for others. He was willing to accommodate people who are open and unrepentant in sin. Defy the grid. Do you think they're gay or lesbian because of their abuse? I think that that's how gays and lesbians reproduce. I think that they abuse kids. I have a sister who is a lesbian in large part because our dad was violent and terrifying. And consequently, because of his example and because of his sinful example and presentation of masculinity, she was turned off by men. Girls either grow up and marry their father, for better or for worse, or they just reject men entirely because of their father. I don't have any gay or lesbian friends who haven't been abused. A lot of people might think that I'm someone who doesn't have gay or lesbian friends. I've had gay and lesbian friends and acquaintances over the years, and I have never let anybody violate them physically. I think they've been through enough. And I love to fight it anyway, so anybody who gave me an excuse in that respect generally got their teeth knocked out. I don't sanction that. I think gay and lesbian people have been through enough in terms of childhood abuse and in terms of physical and sexual abuse. And the way back for them from that is to provide them the example that they lacked in their childhood. That is strong masculinity that is restrained, under control, and doesn't involve physical abuse or force. Like, men should be capable of defending themselves and their families, but they shouldn't be bullying people. They shouldn't be putting their hands on people in any other context other than self-defense. It's just that simple. You should not terrorize other people. And the gays and lesbians that I've known over the course of my life were absolutely terrorized during childhood, including my sister. And some of us, because of our personality and our temperament, are more equipped to deal with that and process it and keep a long-term perspective. I knew that I would be out of my parents' house eventually. And as a result, I just always kept that perspective, and my sister did not. I had to cut ties with her. It broke my damn heart. Not because of gay and lesbian stuff, but because I arranged for her to go into a program in Orlando, Florida, for her considerable mental health issues. She had been Baker Acted twice. That's what they call involuntary commitment in the state of Florida. She had been Baker Acted twice. She was living on the streets. I did not know that she was living on the streets until I got a phone call from her threatening to commit suicide. Personally, I spent a lot of time and money and prayer on her, and I've tried to help her. And the issue is that she will not take advantage of the help that I and our other siblings and others have offered. She is so incredibly damaged that I don't know if she's going to be all right, or if she's going to live, or if she's going to die. And I could kill my dad. I could dig him up from the grave and kill him for the effect that he had on her, because it is directly attributable to that. Little girls, if they have a father who's physically violent and abusive, in my experience and observation, are more likely to become lesbians. If they have a father who's sexually abusive, they're definitely more likely to become lesbians or bisexuals. Because ultimately we rely on the examples of our parents to model behavior for us that is productive and healthy. And if we don't have that, we get into all sorts of dysfunction. I learned a lot about what not to do from my parents. And unfortunately, it took a long time to unpack it. It took a long time to, deal with having your hair on fire for years after leaving their house because you're paranoid and you can't process how people behave without interpreting it as a threat. And that's what childhood abuse does. That's what a childhood abuse environment does to people. Some people become gay and lesbian, other people just become extremely dysfunctional. And I went to work, I paid bills, and I did everything, but I was not married until my 30s, and I was married twice and divorced twice. I had two one-night stands that took 10 years of my life. And, part of my dysfunction was that I worked out as hard as I did in my 20s and screwed up my neck and spine as a result. Lifelong injuries as a result of that because I was extreme in how I worked out and like the pursuit of my physical fitness goals. I lifted extremely heavy, and I'm paying for it now. And it's a direct result. My dad was built like a bodybuilder. It's great to instill in your children the necessity for physical fitness and exercise. There's a point at which it goes too far. And I think, like that little cliche, all things in moderation, is extremely valid. And you should realize, like, at every turn in your life, there are little eyes watching you. It's vitally important, and you should be cognizant of that in everything that you do. I tell my nephews and nieces, I do not ask you to follow anybody else's example in this family because everybody else in this family says one thing and does another. I tell you to follow my example because my example is consistent. I say what I'm going to do and I do it. And I stand on my beliefs. My life is my testimony. I mean, certainly this might seem like a sermon to you, but I do assure you that I live these values and principles that I'm espousing tonight. And in Texas and Florida, I was surrounded by Latter-day Saints who did the same thing. I was surrounded by Christians who did the same thing. And when I came to Utah and I realized, these people, they go to sacrament service on Sunday, they go to elders quorum and Sunday school and Relief Society. And then on Monday, they're in the gym down in Pleasant Grove or American Fork, and they're hooking up because they're swingers. They're polyamorous. And it boggled my mind. That's the culture here. I mean, I did interview after interview. There are people whose names are on signs all over the state. People whose names you would recognize who, they've had dozens of affairs on their wives. But that isn't ritual abuse, and I did not publicize it because ultimately their spouse knew about it. It led to a divorce. Their ecclesiastical authorities were aware of it. They were excommunicated and rebaptized. They're still doing it. And I have to believe that the church is aware of it, but the church is looking the other direction. It's ingrained and it's baked into the culture here to say one thing and do another in the state of Utah. And the church in Utah, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is by no means representative of the experience that I had in Texas and in Florida. If I had not come here and I had not become aware of the scourge of ritual abuse, I would probably still be a Latter-day Saint. And I suppose that is something I resent the most here. I don't like child rapists. I don't like child abusers at all, and I've made my position on that clear. I think it should be a capital crime if you have any sexual contact with anyone else at all without their consent, adult or child. You should face execution for that, or life imprisonment. That's the only way the rest of us can be safe, is if you're dead, or if you are incarcerated for the rest of your life. You're not going to rehabilitate. You're not going to recover. So I made my position clear on that till I'm blue in the face. Um, I think we need to have higher standards as a society, both religiously and secularly. But first of all, religious institutions need to insist that the people who claim membership in their institutions actually follow the rules of the club. And those rules are not hard. They are, but they aren't. I mean, the law of chastity, obviously, is extremely hard unless you and your wife are committed to using sex both for pleasure and to alleviate temptation, and also creating the conditions for sexual intimacy. And as a man, the clearest indication that you're creating those conditions is that you invest your time in your wife. I try to get my wife between 5:30 and 8:30 to 9 every night. Here lately, it's been difficult because of how tired I am and how much pain I'm in. But my wife is gracious. She understands that, and I do give her as much time as I possibly can, as much time as I'm physically able to. And guess what? When you do that, your wife wants to have sex with you. She wants to be intimate with you. And so it's not hard. Like, no woman who sees her husband, the father of her children, like playing and roughhousing and spending quality time with their children, thinks to herself, I'm not attracted to that man. And if she does, she's a piece of shit. If that's what turns you off, then you're not fit as a human being. If that's what causes your husband's attractiveness, or the father of your children's attractiveness to decline in your perspective, then there's just nothing that can be done for you. It's the same thing with these men. I mean, when you see like your wife and the time that she spends with your children, educating them and raising them and providing a good example for them, and feeding them and clothing them and sheltering them and cleaning them and just giving them all of the things that they need. If you're not attracted to that and you don't find that sexy, the problem is you. The problem will always be you. And you need to check yourself, and you need to go to God over it, if you even have a relationship with God. And if you want to say things to your wife that you shouldn't be saying to anybody, if you want to mistreat her, if you're taking out things that she didn't do on her because she's there and she's a captive audience, then again, the problem's you. The reason those rules exist within the church, within Christianity, and within the scriptures is to govern our behavior and to govern how we relate to each other and how we interact with each other. And if you don't see that, why be a Latter-day Saint? Why be a professing Christian? Just go be a piece of shit elsewhere. Go mistreat other people elsewhere. Go sacrifice your marriage, your relationship with your kids. But don't sit here after the fact and be shocked when your kids grow up to be dysfunctional. That's a direct reflection on you and the job you did up bringing them up. If you have a problem with the way your kids turned out, go to the mirror and examine your role in that. If you have a problem with the way that your spouse is acting because you mistreat them, go to the mirror. Fix yourself. It's that simple. There are no days off for being a husband or a wife or a parent. There's no days off for being a Christian. There's just no excuse for it. I mean, the rules are very clear. The principles are there. If you're not in the scripture every day, if you're not reflecting, you're not in prayer, and you don't want to be in prayer, then that is a sign that you don't really have a relationship with God. In my day-to-day life, like, my interaction, my communion with God is essential to everything. I don't feel right. It's like when I was younger. If I didn't work out, I felt sluggish. I felt off. And I still feel that way now. I have these little 15-pound dumbbells, and I haven't worked out with 15-pound dumbbells since I was 12. But given my neck and my back, that's what I'm down to. I used to work out with between 75 and 100-pound dumbbells. But that's over. My spine won't tolerate it. But at the end of the day, the principle is this. I mean, it was such a huge part of my life that if I didn't do it, I didn't feel right. And every day, if I'm not in prayer and communion or fellowship with God, if I'm not reflecting on scriptures that I've read thousands of times, it just doesn't feel right. My life doesn't go right. And I'm not blaming my wife or my boss or anybody else when that happens. I need to go do some self-examination, figure out what my problem is. And what I'm saying to every professing Christian and Latter-day Saint out there is, you need to do the same thing. Don't take it out on other people around you when you're screwing up. You know, look at how you allocate your time to know what your priorities truly are. And if your time reflects priorities that aren't in order, that is, your time is spent on something other than your spouse or your family, outside of work, or if your work is more important to your family, if you live to work as opposed to work to live, to pay for the expenses of life, then there's your sign. Something needs to change. Your priorities are askew. And if there's dysfunction with your kids or your spouse as a result of that, that's your fault. It's not anybody else's fault. Certainly not God's fault. And you need to recalibrate and apologize and make amends and get over it. But the other side of it is you need to stand on truth. And the reason the church has been overrun with this rot of ritual abuse and Satanism and, secular humanism, so on and so forth, all of these different ideologies that have different names but are the same thing. They are satanic. The reason the church has been overrun and infested with this is because its membership that legitimately they are Christian, they are trying to live it, they don't want to be mean. They don't want to be judgmental. I mean, let's not judge. And here's the thing. There's a difference between judgment and discernment. You're not going to judge anybody. You're not going to send anybody to heaven. You're not going to send anybody to hell. That's not going to be your decision to make. But you can call a spade, and a man in a dress is still a man. And if he's wearing that which pertaineth to a woman, he's in violation of Leviticus 18, and he should not be accommodated or tolerated in churches. He should be condemned. He should be rebuked. He should go put on a suit and some slacks and a dress shirt. He should dress and present as a man because that is who he is, and God does not make mistakes. This whole idea of, the gender that you're assigned at birth, you're not assigned anything by anyone except God. You are born male or female. And there are times when there are chromosomal abnormalities or genetic disorders like Klinefelter syndrome, but those affect less than 0.5% of the population. And just like rape is largely not the cause of abortion, it's less than 1% of abortions are because of a sexual assault. Most of them are elective procedures. So let's cut the shit here. Like, at the end of the day, churches should not be tolerating any of this. And they should not be accommodating or inclusive of people who want to call sin something other than sin. They want to call infanticide something other than murder. They want to call homosexuality something other than sexual degeneracy, or polyamory something other than sexual degeneracy. It's one man, it's one woman, united in marriage. They become one flesh. And under no circumstances can one man become one flesh with multiple women. So polygamy is off the table. In Deuteronomy, it says a king should be the husband of one wife. So when the Bible presents examples of polygamy in the Old Testament, it's describing what happened. It's not prescribing it. And for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which I used to be a part of, to sit here and go against Jacob too, which is very clear, just because Solomon and David were polygamous, that's not a reason for you to be a polygamist. It's whoredom. It's always referred to as whoredom in the Book of Mormon. And then later on, Doctrine and Covenants 101 is the only section in Doctrine and Covenants that was ever excised or removed and replaced, because Doctrine and Covenants 132 was publicly proclaimed as Revelation 1852, but it wasn't canonized or included until the 1870s in the Doctrine and Covenants. Like, at the end of the day, the church just needs to say that polygamy is a satanic practice and a satanic ideology, and no one is going to go to heaven or be exalted because they were involved in plural marriage. Your salvation comes from the atonement, not from plural marriage. Your salvation comes from the atonement of Christ on the cross, not from your calling and election made sure, aka the second anointing. This is bullshit. The atonement needs no addendums. Christ crucified on the cross needs no addendums. And when people start complicating salvation, they start complicating doctrine, as opposed to just following the clear words of Scripture and Revelation. That's where we get into what was supposed to be the topic of tonight's episode. David Leavitt, who has reinvented himself as a castle remodeling influencer, as opposed to a child trafficker and an alleged child rapist. He stole Alessandra Fishing Hawk from her rightful father, her lawful father, her biological father, Gary Valenzuela. And Jason Preston had Gary and his mother, Teresa, on his show today. I mean, that episode dropped. And I think it's it's insightful that that episode dropped, because at the end of the day, there's no disputing what David Leavitt did. He purchased a child from that child's junkie mother, Tona Fishing Hawk. And if Tona has a problem with it, she can suck a potato. I'd like to say something else, because I don't bear any witness or have any respect for a woman who sells her own child to the likes of David Leavitt for any reason. And that's what she did. She was driving around the reservation, the Northern Cheyenne Reservation of Montana, in a gold Cadillac after David Leavitt took custody of her child and started an adoption process illegally, in violation of the Indian Child Welfare Act. He is not that child's blood relative. He has no Native American heritage whatsoever, which ICWA was designed to prevent people outside of Native American communities from raiding Native American families for their children and adopting them. Like, it was designed to prevent the dilution of Native American culture and heritage through adoption, because there are these white people who just love to have a brown baby. And that's exactly what happened. David Leavitt allegedly paid Jay Skills back $30,000 in cash. I know this from my own research that this allegedly happened. He admitted to offering a quid pro quo in that interview that we've all seen with Amy Hurdy, in which he talks about exporting buffalo to the Ukraine. He may have made that offer in addition to the cash payment that he made to Jay Skillsback, allegedly. But at the end of the day, he is prohibited by state and federal law from offering anything of value and remuneration to anyone to take custody of a child or to adopt a child. Children are not for sale. And of course, in the state of Utah, where wealthy, politically connected individuals like David Leavitt are used to being able to buy whatever outcome they want, that's a novel idea. It's a novel idea that children are not for sale. Because everything else in Utah is, including church membership, because people who are wealthy and influential within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they don't have to follow the same rules as the rest of us. They don't have to be faithful to their wives or avoid drinking coffee and alcohol. They don't have to follow the word of wisdom. Exceptions are made to them because their 10% is so much bigger than your 10%. And their wealth is seen as indicative of their virtue. How they got that wealth through multi-level marketing, scams, and so on and so forth, like New Skin. The church takes stock options from companies like New Skin and Unique and others. And that's how those people tithe to the church. They don't pay tithes the way you and I do out of the paychecks. They just give the church stock options at their companies, which are built on fleecing idiot people who just want to get rich quick. And so they sign up for an MLM and they sell makeup or they sell scented oils, like essential oils and so on and so forth. They sell whatever the MLM is providing, and they plunk down a bunch of money for the starter kit and the registration fees and onboarding costs. And of course, guess what? They never get rich. And they try to, make a merchandise out of their families. Buy this unique from me. Buy this scented oil from me. Buy this makeup and cosmetic product from me. Because I can't have an organic relationship with you based on anything real. I need you to buy this from me so I can get rich. And I can be your upline and you can be my downline in New Skin and whatnot. And there's a reason Utah is the number one state in the country in terms of scams and fraud. It's because of this bullshit in the church that says that a person's wealth, their material wealth, and their material assets are a sign of their virtue and also their blessing from God, their merit, as opposed to what they actually got the money from, which is fleecing other people who are naive and stupid and just want to get rich quick. Like, at the end of the day, the church has no business dipping its beak in stock options from New Skin or Unique or any of these other MLM companies. Like, they're a scam. It's that simple. And anybody who says otherwise is lying to you. Like, it is what it is. And so the culture that this has created is that people like David Leavitt feel like they can buy whatever outcome because they have enough money. In his 2008 congressional campaign, which was ultimately unsuccessful, he didn't have enough money to buy a congressional seat. His financial disclosures revealed a net worth between $31 and $81 million. This is a guy who In the wake of the Hamlin allegations becoming mainstream in 2022, he was able to flee the country, buy a castle for $1.5 million, and spend God knows how many millions of dollars remodeling it while the heat died down. And now he's on his reinvention and rehabilitation tour. And it ties into everything that I've been talking about tonight. It's this willingness to accommodate sin is something other than sin. Because David Leavitt's a liberal. He wanted to engage in George Soros-style criminal reforms, more lenient sentencing. He wanted to correct the social ills of systemic racism and so on and so forth. And here's the problem with that. Nobody disputes that the people who get caught possessing and trafficking drugs and raping and assaulting people, they are guilty. We see it all over social media. They record themselves now committing felonies. Like that's what they do. That's the level that we've reached as a society. They are not worried about going to jail or prison. And it's because of men like David Leavitt. Because they want to wave a wand and cure society's injustices. But it's not injustice when you reap the consequences of your own actions. And mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent. I believe it was Voltaire who said that. So when I see David Leavitt, I don't see him as the cause of anything. I see him as a symptom of a corruption and a rot in a church that should hold David Leavitt to the same standard as everybody else. And the church should have serious questions about the allegations against David Leavitt and the others. And according to the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act lawsuit filed by Kate Baxter and Miriam Hamlin, they did go to the church and they did report. They did report their abuse, and they were dissuaded and discouraged by members of the church, by authorities within the church, from pursuing criminal cases against the people who abused them. And if they as victims were subjected to that kind of pressure, I can only imagine what others were pressured to do. That is, law enforcement, judges, prosecutors, anybody and everybody in the system in Utah, the pressure that they received to make those charges against David Lee Hamlin in 2012 to 2014 go away. Because David Lee Hamlin had dirt on a lot of prominent people, including David Leavitt. David Leavitt, to this day, insists that he's never been to Spring City. And I know that that's bullshit, because I've spoken to victims who place him in Spring City. He's lying. And in the criminal case in the 6th District in Sanpete County, David Leavitt was going to David Lee Hamlin was going to call David Leavitt as a witness, even though David Leavitt said that he'd never been to Spring City. And at the last minute, David Lee Hamlin and his attorney backed off of that ploy because they were going to have to proffer. They were going to have to say in advance what they were calling David Leavitt to testify about, as opposed to just using Leavitt as a means to get the case dismissed. If he can't testify, then the charges should be dropped. And so Marvin Bagley and the rest of the judges in the 6th District did say, you're going to have to say in advance what you're calling him to testify about. You're going to have to proffer to that. And he didn't want to do that, because in doing so, he would put himself on a collision course with people who would kill him in this state. So Tobias Schroeder has been waiting for almost 4 years now to have a trial. for the abuse that David Lee Hamlin inflicted on him. Ask yourself if David Lee Hamlin was anybody else, if he didn't have dirt on David Leavitt and other prominent Utahns, if he hadn't recorded them buying his daughters as child prostitutes or buying child pornography videos that he produced with Brian Capener and Paul Larson, allegedly, according to the TVPRA lawsuit. If he didn't have that kind of compromising material or information on those prominent people, if he wouldn't have already been tried, convicted, and incarcerated for what he did to Tobias Schroeder, Emily Sheets, and to his own daughters, and to dozens of other people that I have personally spoken to and interviewed, and I believe them. I am not here to mince words at IRA about what has taken place in this state. For 4 years, I have labored on a shoestring budget to present the facts to readers and to the wider audience. I've gone on any podcast that would have me. I've been frozen out recently on those podcasts. For obvious reasons. Because I don't mince words about LMNOP community or abortion or anything else. I don't mince words about Zionism being satanic. I mean, Zionists and Talmudic Jews and Kabbalists say that Jesus is boiling in excrement in hell, and I will not countenance blasphemy against my Savior. I point blank said, Zionist Christian is an oxymoron. Like, a lot of people would say that makes me anti-Semitic, including Jewish friends of mine who have, a couple of months back, I said, to know you is to be anti-Semitic. I mean, I still love you, and I hope you convert and you find Christ and everything, but you're insufferably supremacist people. You wake up every day and you think that you're better than everybody else, and you're entitled and you have a license to do abominable things to other people because you're Jewish. I mean, no other reason, because 8,000 years ago some stretch of desert was promised to you. And so you're entitled to ethnically cleanse that stretch of land by any and all means necessary. It's not that I sympathize with the Palestinians, who aren't any better. They support Hamas, which is called for not just the elimination of Israel, but for the wholesale extermination of everyone of Jewish descent on the planet. Like, that's the level. So when I'm anti-Semitic, or I'm accused of being anti-Semitic, I'm even-handed. I'm anti-Semitic for both Jews and Arabs who embrace supremacist ideology. And as I've said till I'm blue in the face, I never woke up every day and thought to myself that I was entitled to do horrendous things to other people because of the color of my skin. I never thought that I was better than anybody because I woke up white. And I don't think that many white people wake up that way. I don't think that I'm better than anybody else because I'm Christian. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be forgiven for my sins, to be redeemed, and to be given eternal life through Christ. And I believe Christ is true. That's why I am a Christian. I believe He's the only path to salvation and redemption for anybody. I will testify that until the day that I die. I will stand on that hill and die on that hill until the day that I die. The truth is non-negotiable. And I find it interesting that in the name of diversity, equity, inclusion, and whatever other term du jour that the left offers, as long as you're Hindu, as long as you're Muslim, as long as you're Jewish, as long as you're Buddhist, you're okay. But if you're an Orthodox Christian who stands on these issues like abortion or same-sex marriage, same-sex rights. You have a right to be a degenerate or a deviant. If you deny that minor attracted persons, that's what they're trying to call pedophiles now and child rapists, minor attracted person. If you deny that linguistic and semantic nonsense, call it what it is, you are disparaged as a bigot, as a homophobe. I'm not scared of any homosexual. I'm certainly not scared of any feminist who supports abortion. I'm not afraid of anybody except God, which is why I oppose these things. And I will not call sin anything other than what it is, which is sin. It's depravity. It's degeneracy. It is inimical to human life. The wages of sin is death. That's what it says in the Gospels. And so the difference between IRA and the type of church that permits someone like David Leavitt to exist with impunity and other platforms in this ritual abuse battle, such as We Are the People Utah, is that I don't brook any consequence. I don't accommodate sin. I don't platform it. I don't platform those who say nonsensical things like I'm a queer Christian or I'm a Zionist Christian. You're not. You're either a Christian or you're something else. And if you're something else, you serve the kingdom of Satan. It's that simple. That's who you worship by a different name. And, there are people who say, we should have religious pluralism and religious freedom and people should be free to believe what they believe. Well, how's that working out for you? How's all this Christian Zionism and Islamofascism and Zionism, how's it working out for you at the gas pump, at the grocery store? How's it working out for those Palestinian children in Gaza who are being maimed by IDF forces because they happen to sit on the territory that a terrorist organization like Hamas controls? And their parents are fanatics who voted. There was a plurality of votes in favor of Hamas. How's that working out? How's it working out to be pluralistic and to be politically correct and to not call a spade, to not be judgy, and to also be afraid to discern, to be afraid to call this what it is? It's demonic. I have nothing against anybody of any skin color coming into the West legally. I don't have any problem with that at all. What I have a problem with is people who don't embrace the values of the countries and the societies and the cultures in which they seek to join, but they want those countries and societies and cultures to move towards their values and their ideologies. They want to force them to assimilate rather than the other way around. There's a reason these people are leaving their shithole countries. It's because the values that underlie those countries, that give those countries identity and meaning, cause them to leave. Nobody in their right mind wants to live in Iran or Saudi Arabia or Qatar or UAE. Nobody who truly has any comprehension of what those societies are wants to live there. Nobody with any sense wants to live in Israel, because the values that define those countries, that give those countries their identity, lead to inhumane behavior. They lead to lawlessness. And when you import people with those values into the West, those people aren't here to make the West better. They're here to undermine the West from within and to sabotage the West from within. They are bad faith actors. And so you see it in the news coverage. You see 80% of Somali households in Minnesota are on some form of government assistance, not because they're Somali, not because they're black, Well, because their values teach them that they are entitled to the hard earned fruits of someone else's labor to sustain themselves, and that's because they're superior. They're Muslim. And the other people who are working, who are suckers, who pay taxes, who contribute to society, they exist for their benefit. Zionists believe that they'll have, I believe, 2,800 of us apiece as slaves when their Messiah comes. That's what you're co-signing when you co-sign Zionism. And it's this sort of cuckoldry that enables people like David Leavitt to operate with impunity. Because he has the same sort of conceit. He is entitled to be accommodated by you. Yes, he broke the law. He trafficked Alessandra Fishing Hawk. He stole her from her rightful father. He stole her from her family. And he used his money and his wealth and his influence and his last name to do it and to get away with it. And he's entitled to do so because his money, his wealth, his last name, his position makes him better than those other people. And so therefore he has a license to violate the law with impunity where they are concerned. And to steal or buy a child from a member of a family who is a drug addict. So much so that other children of hers have been surrendered into the custody of their grandmother. That's the level. It's a gold Cadillac. That's what a junkie. That is the going price. That $30,000 allegedly, are the going price for a child in Utah, in Montana, in the United States. And David Leavitt has not been prosecuted. He probably isn't going to be prosecuted because as long as he's in Utah, as long as he's the younger brother of a former governor, he's immune from the consequences that the rest of us would face if we did this. And of course, the platform that's publicizing it, all due credit to Jason and Alexia Preston for giving Gary and Teresa Valenzuela a platform to tell their story about what happened to them at long last. I mean, I believe the first time I spoke to them was last year in person at a rally at the state capitol. They declined my offers for help, pro bono, for free, because they were working with professionals. And what I would say to them is, it's been years. How's that working out for you? You got on We Are the People Utah, but your daughter, your granddaughter, is still in the custody of an alleged child rapist and ritual abuser. So how's working with professionals? And I'm not saying that I would have achieved any different of a result. But at the end of the day, Alessandra Fishing Hawk belongs with her father and her grandmother. She belongs with Mary Medicine Top, her grandmother, and Terry Valenzuela, her grandmother. She deserves to know her uncles Darwin and Justin. And David Leavitt belongs in prison for what he did. It's that simple. And for the good and decent people of Utah who actually follow the teachings of Christ, who actually implement those teachings into practice in their daily lives, and how they treat others, who would never buy a child. You're going to have to make a choice about the course of your state and your church, and you're going to have to decide whether the church can be redeemed from within or whether you just need to leave. It is a $300 billion corporation at this point. It If that isn't fuck you money, I don't know what is. They no longer need you, and they are no longer paying attention to what you have to say or your input. And they certainly don't care what God has to say. Um, that is self-evident by the way that they have treated this topic of ritual abuse and people like David Leavitt. Um, he clearly does not believe in the obligations or the oaths and covenants that Latter-day Saints undertake to follow the law. He doesn't believe in that at all. Um, and that's obvious in the way that he went about breaking the law to obtain custody of Alessandra Fishing Hawk and to buy her the same way you would buy a car or a piece of property. That's the level of David Leavitt. And it's not the first time he evinces that kind of attitude. If you follow the story of the Adoption Center of Utah and James Webb, the former owner of the Adoption Center of Utah, James Webb was able to successfully get the Utah County Attorney's Office disqualified from his case as the prosecuting agency because he alleged that David Leavitt, in lieu of adoption fees, had signed over a car to him and then used his position as Juab County Attorney to threaten him with criminal prosecution if he did not return that vehicle to him. And the findings of fact, the rulings of law, the order in that case related to that hearing, it was sealed by the court. Just like the adoption records in Alessandra Fishing Hawk's adoption were sealed by the 4th District. So that's the level. That's what we're seeing in Utah. And it's a direct result of this attitude that people have, that you can just have a morally relativistic attitude about sin and corruption. And, we'll just all wait until Jesus comes back. In the meantime, if what the Hamlin sisters are telling about David Leavitt is true, David Leavitt is likely subjecting Alessandra Fishing Hawk to some horrific, lifelong abuse that will affect every relationship she's ever had. David Leavitt is not qualified to be a parent or a guardian of any child if what those Hamlin sisters are saying is true, and I believe it is. And based on the documented truth of how he proceeded with that illegal adoption, he has no business being in custody of Alessandra Fishing Hawk. He has no legal basis whatsoever, and he broke the law to obtain custody of her and to finalize his adoption of her. He stole her from her family. And as much as I disagree with We Are the People Utah platforming people who are deviants and normalizing their deviancy, queer Christians and that sort of thing, someone who names Dallin Oaks as her rapist and then says she sustains him is the prophet, seer, and revelator of the Restored Church. I can't wrap my head around it, but that's what they're doing. And I'm pushing back on it because they want to be inclusive. They want to be civil. But to their credit, they gave Gary Valenzuela and his mother a platform to tell their story, and they should give a platform to the Fishing Hawk family and Mary Medicine Top to do the same. Whether or not the Fishing Hawks and Mary Medicine Top actually take them up on that offer is another matter, because as I understand it, they are dependent on David Leavitt for financial support. They're dependent on the Leavitt family for that kind of support. And so they've kept quiet about what they know in order to keep the money running. And what I would say is when you look at that family's history, the Native American Placement Program, that Mary Medicine Top was placed with the Eastwoods, and then her children were placed with the Eastwood family. That is Shalom Eastwood Leavitt, David Leavitt's wife's family. They were placed with her and they were placed with the Eastwood family. 2 generations. If you think it's an accident that Donna Fishing Hawk grew up to be a drug addict and a junkie, that's a trauma response. God knows what happened to her in that house, because in the Hamlin victim statements, they say Shalom's family, while lower ranking in the Church of Satan's hierarchy, is part of the Church of Satan. That's what the Hamlin sisters allege, that their parents told them about Shalom Leavitt. And the church has ample reason to confront David and Shalom Leavitt about the allegations in those victim statements. They have ample reason to call them in and say, did you have sex outside of wedlock with David Leavitt, or with David Hamlin? Did you have sex with children? Did you consume pornography or patronize child prostitution businesses? The church has every reason. They're not bound by probable cause like a secular civil authority. The church has every reason to initiate disciplinary action against the Levitts, and they haven't. One of the great indignities of this is that Shalom Leavitt has a professorship at BYU, which is incomprehensible to me, and that in the aftermath of the Hamlin victim statements, at a rally that Jason Preston organized, that I spoke at, Shalom Leavitt was going to appear with newly minted Apostle Elder Patrick Kieran, who has his own history helping Peyton Bussey, a serial sexual predator from the time he was a child into adulthood, with his rehabilitation and his restoration into the church. Peyton Bussey was baptized and ordained into the priesthood even after he had been convicted as, I believe, a 13-year-old for molesting 2 boys who were 5 and 6 years of age. It later turned out that Peyton Bussey allegedly sexually abused his nephew Harvey on multiple occasions over years. And yet the church did nothing in that case to discipline him in any serious fashion. And Elder Patrick Kieran appears as one of the people helping him with his journey to repentance, as though he could repent. And here's the thing, when you see a 13, 14-year-old boy molesting other children, that is a sign you should look at his parents. Phil and Kathy Bussey should be examined. And so should the parents of the family structure of every single alleged, credibly accused child rapist. This behavior does not develop in a vacuum. I say that as someone with 25 years of experience tracking pedophile networks. Just like the LMNOP community, Defy the Great Ender question earlier, do you think they're gay or lesbian because of their abuse? Yes. Do I think that adult pedophiles and child predators are child predators because of their own childhood abuse or dysfunction? Yes. Absolutely, without hesitation or reservation, I think that. And I think the church needs a reality check for that. If it's going to have any credibility, if it's going to survive as anything other than a hedge fund masquerading as a religion, there's going to have to be some really tough discussions and epiphanies that occur. And for those in church leadership and in the church rank and file who look at the credibly accused leaders of the church who are allegedly part of this abuse, who allegedly perpetrate this abuse, who, Dallin Oaks has been accused of raping kids. Russell M. Nelson, while he was alive, he was one of the first people I investigated out of Utah for the allegations against his son-in-law, Dick Miles, and his daughter, Brenda. And I had incontrovertible evidence that he covered that up. He used his position as an apostle to dissuade any kind of internal church discipline and also external police investigations into the allegations against the Miles and their former neighbor, Bill Carstensen, who later went on to molest children in his second marriage. And if this had been dealt with and handled in the 80s like it should have been, it's doubtful that Bill Carstensen would have had additional victims. And if you look at the Mount Olympus neighborhood as depicted in paper dolls by Loretta Gale, aka April Daniels, you see exactly what I'm talking about. This is generational. These children become adults who abuse because they learned it from their own parents. Bill Carstensen's mother allegedly had sex with him in front of her own grandchildren. That's the level of dysfunction we're talking about. And until people start acknowledging the reality of this and rejecting the church's approach to this, which is to suppress it and to treat victims like they're the criminals, it isn't going to change. No church that sanctions or covers this type of abuse up is true. And by that standard, it's not just the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's the Catholic Church. It's Southern Baptist. It's everywhere. And on that note, I'm going to turn my attention to the chat. We have Tresha, I believe her name is. Difficult research. I find it wild that Dateline pulled Leavitt's episode of the show involving Nicholas Rossi. That's not a normal thing for a major network to do. They pulled one regarding Lori's, I guess it's Lori Vallow Daybell. Melanie, too. What I would say about that is if you are so inclined, you can look at FOIA requests involving Operation See No Evil and David Leavitt, and you can find that an NBC News producer filed a FOIA request with HSI. I don't know what the outcome of it was, but I do know from my own journalistic investigation that Jace Killsback allegedly told an NBC News producer that David Leavitt had paid him cash to intervene so that David Leavitt could take custody of Alessandra Fishing Hawk in violation of federal law. Difficult research also says, I've often thought about little Alessandra being in that home with those animals. I can't even imagine. Well, imagine being someone who's investigated it for 4 years straight. The last question from Difficult Research. Did Sheriff Mike Smith protect allegedly Tim Ballard from being investigated further? I don't know that he did. I've heard the allegations that he did. As far as documentation or proof of that, I don't have it. If I did, I would publicize it. But if you really want to get down to brass tacks about Tim Ballard, perhaps you should ask certain other podcasters about their relationships with Tim Ballard and their financial connections to them, or to Tim Ballard and his network. You should ask who they're socializing with and rubbing elbows with, and if there's a financial component involved. Full disclosure, I was hired by a private party to look into allegations that touched on to Tim Ballard tangentially. And ultimately, that person, who was one of Tim Ballard's biggest and most vocal boosters, is no longer a donor or a subscriber to IRA because he was upset about my content, especially those funny AI-generated songs that I was making about the corruption within the church and ritual abuse. remarkably thin-skinned. But ultimately, you should look at people. Anyone who has a financial interest with Tim Ballard or receives financial benefits from associating with Tim Ballard or socializing with him, you should look at that. I'm looking into it. And if you have tips, you can email me at goel@investigationsandritualabuse.com. I would love to speak with you about how Tim Ballard has injected himself into the ritual abuse story and narrative as part of his ongoing effort to rehabilitate himself from what he did with the couples ruse and other instances at Operation Underground Railroad. I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, well, God willing, and my health holding up, I'll be able to have additional revelations in that, as it's something that I became aware of in the last week. And you toads out there in the Mormon Priestcraft Podcast Network know what I'm talking about. So, for the 40 or so people who watch this live tonight, that's the audience. You'll just have to stay tuned. And you'll have to subscribe because, as I said earlier in the episode, IRA will be behind a paywall. We will no longer be doing free content for the foreseeable future because I've gotten tired of the freeloaders who want everything for free. And by the way, that includes Jason Preston, who said to me point blank, I should open IRA up and make it free, not subscription based, because he knows a lot of people don't like to pay for content. So let's see. Difficult research. My belief is that Tom Harrison used MK Ultra-like techniques on bad actors. Chad, I guess she's talking about Chad Daybell, Julie Rowe, Tim, Jody Hildebrandt, and we witnessed a Mormon Manson-like psyop happen before our eyes. Don't judge me. I don't judge you. I don't know that Tom Harrison is capable of using MK Ultra-like techniques. I don't attribute that much competence to Tom. Do I think that Tom Harrison has all 10 fingers and all 10 toes and every dirty thing in Mormonism? Yeah. But he's welcome to contact me. I've been trying to talk to him for 4 years about any number of things, but Tom doesn't want to speak to me for obvious reasons. I do my own thing, as Jason Preston says, and I don't make deals of the sort that the Tom Harrison, Abraham Gileadi, and Tim Ballard crowd like. So, Difficult Research says, I will email you ASAP about this theory that Tom Harrison used MK Ultra-like techniques. Well, I look forward to that. I will see you guys on the next episode of IRA 131, which will be forthcoming whenever my health and content are permitting. 9 likes tonight during the live stream. I'm surprised I've lasted like 2 hours plus. See, the timer indicates that I've lasted almost 2.5 hours, which is a record lately. We need to check your YouTube settings to make sure you have the correct options to boost you into the algorithm, because we have to get your content out there. People want to hear it, but they're not connecting for some reason. Well, that's probably because I'm being shadow banned. And also because apparently I haven't figured out the algorithm, although I will say my subscribers exploded when I started making funny songs. The Goodnight Tyler Robinson hearing is coming sooner rather than later. I don't know how many of you have had that on the background during the day, but even with a stacked deck and a rigged house, the prosecution down in Utah County has been embarrassingly inadequate. Um, say what you will about Tyler Robinson's attorneys who are fighting an uphill battle with things stacked against them. They've done a marvelous job of debunking the prosecution's case and poking holes in it, although the holes were already there. Um, it's like watching two retards try to figure out a wedding night. That's what the Utah County Attorney's Office has been in the Tyler Robinson case, or whoever the prosecutors are in that case. It's been pretty terrible. I've watched it sporadically during the day. It's been on in the background while I work at my paying gig. Um, you know, it will be played in law schools, in my opinion, as an example of what not to do, much like the prosecution's performance in the O.J. Simpson murder trial was played when I was in law school as an example of what not to do. Judge Lance Ito was giving the prosecution the business over something that they filed uh, at one point, and that clip was played in our legal studies or legal writing class. I think he's a patsy, but that's me. I have an open mind. I think he's a homosexual degenerate, but he didn't murder Charlie Kirk. I've been streaming it. Today was boring. Well, yes, it was. But it's also Utah, and unfortunately, it's emblematic of the corruption in Utah. So, in Utah, the guilty are never convicted, and the innocent are frequently convicted. Um, and the Charlie Kirk murder is no different. So, I don't have a lot of sympathy for Tyler Robinson. I believe he was part of a conspiracy to kill Charlie Kirk, but I don't believe he actually killed Charlie Kirk. I still think he's a piece of shit for affiliating with the people that he affiliated with and being part of that conspiracy to kill that man. Um, so, on a certain level, he's reaping the consequences of his own actions. So, on that note, I will let you all go. Thank you for watching tonight's episode and sticking with me as I rambled about various topics, including David Leavitt, We Are the People, Utah, Jason Preston, homosexuals, abortionists, liberals, Zionists, and all of the other things that I am wont to digress about. I'll see you next time. Pray for my neck and spine and my general overall health. I need it. This is Goel of Investigations